We're going to meet some seniors who have served our country in wartime and find out about an initiative that's giving them a way to preserve their stories for tomorrow's students of history. It's called the Veterans History Project, and it was authorized by an act of Congress in the year 2000. It's administered by the American Folklife Center at the U.S. Library of Congress. The project has already collected more than 45,000 individual submissions, representing conflicts from World War I through the current wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Let's hear some of the veterans' stories and learn why they decided to participate.
On a recent morning, Alan Smith came to the Loudoun Valley High School in Purcellville, Virginia, to share some powerful memories from his youth.
Recording in 3, 2, 1.
I was Alan B. Smith. I was in the Army of the United States during World War II.
Smith saw active duty as the United States and its allies set about to stop Adolf Hitler's reign of terror across Europe. Like so many who served, he came home with stories that are full of inspirational and heartbreaking moments.
Did you actually see the concentration camps?
I saw Buchenwald, I believe it was on the second day. I saw Ohrdruf on the first day. Ohrdruf was the worst as far as I was concerned. Later on, I saw Bergen-Belsen and Dachau. But Ohrdruf was not what you called a concentration camp. It was a Vernichtungslager, a destruction camp. Sick, the old, the infirm, and the very young were sent to the showers, and in the showers, instead of water, out came gas. They weren't nice places. And
Students Dan Mashak, Catherine Miller, and Bethany Elker are interviewing Smith for a unique initiative of the Library of Congress, the Veterans History Project. Mandated by an act of Congress in the year 2000, the project is gathering stories from the living veterans of all our nation's wars, from World War I onward. The goal is to assemble the most complete picture possible of what our servicemen and women have witnessed and accomplished.
But what the Veterans History Project does is tell wartime from what we like to call the foxhole level, or the cockpit level, or the nurse that was at a field station. Really first-person accounts of what happened during war.
The project relies on volunteers such as these students to collect veteran stories using either a video camera or tape recorder. Senior volunteers, too, are welcome. Wanda Driver has conducted over 100 interviews at her Erickson retirement home in Virginia. She loves the experience.
It's an education, and it's wonderful. It is truly wonderful, and I'm learning so much.
Since the start of the project, the library has amassed some 45,000 stories and mementos from every war of the 20th and 21st centuries, including the current conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan. There is still much more information to compile.
All this is archived here within the American Folklife Center at the Library of Congress. The purpose of having it here is, first of all, to preserve these stories for all time so that they become a part of the nation's history. But they're also made available to the public, made available to researchers and scholars who are able to use these materials as a part of their work.
Today, there are 17 million living wartime veterans, but the ranks of veterans of World Wars I and II are thinning rapidly. That's why the Veterans History Project is now focused on gathering as many stories as possible from people such as Alan Smith.
We really have an urgency to get the interviews of World War II veterans. There are about 3.2 million of them left. We lose about 1,000 World War II veterans every day. Their story is a tremendous story in the time of our nation's history.
86-year-old Lieutenant Colonel Charlie Davis served in the Air Force and contributed his story to the project.
I think it's a good project. It's one that everybody should participate in.
Davis was a bombardier navigator on a B-24 based in southern Italy during World War II. His plane was shot down on June 6, 1944 over Serbia. Davis suffered a broken ankle and went missing in action for 66 days.
There were no medical care over there, so there was an old gentleman that used to care for animals, and they brought him around, and he took a shot at repairing my leg, pulling it straight and putting a splint on it, but after a couple of 3 days, it still hurt so bad I knew it couldn't have been done properly. So I asked my pilot if he would do it.
Some people had to fight more than just the enemy during their time in the service. Army Major Pearl W. Mack, Jr. saw action in World War II's Battle of the Bulge, but had to sleep in segregated barracks. In fact, he endured unfair discrimination from the time he tried to enlist, the day after the attack on Pearl Harbor.
I jumped up and went up to him and I said, "Sir, I know what happened yesterday, December the 7th, which was Sunday. Our country went to war, and I've come to offer my services." And he looked at me and he told me that the Army doesn't have a quota for niggers. I'll never forget.
Congress funds the Veterans History Project to the tune of $2 million a year. That's surely due in part to the support of members of Congress who are veterans themselves. Arizona Senator John McCain was a prisoner of war during the Vietnam conflict.
The conditions were very poor in the first few years. Guards were very tough. Food was poor, a lot of dysentery. I lived most of the time in solitary confinement, although I was always in contact by tapping with other prisoners.
Many veterans are modest about their service, saying they just did the job they were asked to, but they feel an obligation to pass their knowledge on to future generations.
I learned from the generations that went before me, and I hope they learn something from my generation.
Alan Smith found a special opportunity to pass his ideas on during his Veterans History Project interview.
I just wanted to ask you one final question. What do you think you can tell future generations about your experiences with war? Is it worth it? Is it necessary, or should it best be avoided?
War should be avoided wherever it's possible. It's always a tragedy. I mean, people are people. And it doesn't matter who they are, or what country they belong to, or what religion they have. It's a case of a great tragedy when people are at war.
I'm pleased to introduce the director of the Veterans History Project, Bob Patrick, who is here to tell us more about the project's goals and how it works. Bob oversees the project's operations as well as the establishment of partnerships with veterans organizations and other institutions. He served in the United States Army for 28 years, retiring in 1999, and then devoted more than 5 years to the creation of the National World War II Memorial in Washington, D.C. Bob directed the memorial's dedication on May 29, 2004. It's such an honor to have you here at the Daily Apple.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Why is it important for veterans to leave a legacy?
I think it's important for a lot of reasons. One is for their families. I think their families need to know what they went through during their lives. With the Veterans History Project, we take it to another dimension. They leave their legacy with the Library of Congress and the American Folklife Center, where it's archived for future generations to be inspired by it.
When you talk about future generations being inspired, how do you think it will actually serve future generations?
Well, the stories that we get are stories of service and sacrifice to our country. And in some ways, I think a lot of young men and women don't go into military service these days for various reasons. And by knowing that there's a place that they can go to read and study about what others have done, it will inspire them to maybe serve their country in other ways.
Talking about inspiration, where did the actual inspiration for the Veterans History Project come from? Actually,
it was in a congressman's backyard. Congressman Ron Kine from Wisconsin was at a family picnic back in 1999, 2000. And his father and his uncle started telling war stories. Oh. And these were stories he'd never heard before. And so he got the kids around and said, "You ought to hear these." And then he said, "Well, maybe I can get the video camera and I'll record them." And I think the light went on for him that things like this were going on all over the country. So he came back to Congress, initiated legislation, got an act passed for the Veterans History Project to be created for stories to be collected all over the country.
Tell me how the project actually works.
We sometimes say it's as easy as sitting down at a kitchen table and having a conversation with a veteran, but it's a little bit more complicated than that. We encourage people to sit down with a veteran in their life, either do an audio or video recording of their wartime experiences. We provide a kit that people can use to do this with, a series of questions they could ask that kind of lead the conversation, some forms to fill out. We are the government, you know, so there are a few forms they have to fill out. But all in all, it really isn't that difficult to process.
Tell me a little bit about the types of information, the kind of information that's most valuable that you collect.
I think the most important is wartime experiences and what men and women experienced during combat or doing other things during their military service, medical service, logistical service, other things that all contributed to the war effort that they were involved in.
Do you see a lot of young veterans that are coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan actually coming to see the project and are inspired by it?
We get all kinds of people in. We get a lot of family members. In fact, we have already collected, speaking of those veterans, over 200 collections from veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan. We have a lot of researchers from a lot of different levels that come in and look at our materials.
Thank you so much for that information. We'll be back in 1 second. We've got to take another break, but don't go away. We'll be back shortly to continue our conversation about the Library of Congress's Veterans History Project with Bob Patrick.
Do you know how many women veterans were living in 2005? A, 0.7 million, B, 1.7 million, C, 2.7 million, D, 3.7 million. Do you know how many women veterans were living in 2005? Answer B, 1.7 million female veterans.
Welcome back to the Daily Apple. I've been speaking with Bob Patrick, the director of the Library of Congress's Veterans History Project, about how the project is preserving the wartime experiences of our nation's veterans. Tell me, Bob, does everyone that serves have an opportunity to do this? Is it all branches that are covered?
All branches, all wars. We have collections from World War I, as I mentioned earlier, all the way up to Iraq and Afghanistan. About 60% of the collection are World War II veterans, and we're really anxious to get those interviews.
Is it mostly men, or are a lot of women also interviewed?
Oh, no. We've had a lot of women that have been interviewed. Those that were everything from nurses to pilots to all kinds of service in the military.
Now, in terms of people that might actually want to find out more, my grandfather served in World War II as a Purple Heart. He's actually passed away, unfortunately, but I want to find out more about what he did. Can someone come to the project and find out more about someone, or is it just only the opposite way?
We make it easier than that. You can go online at our website, www.loc.com/vets, and you can search our collections and actually do a search on whether someone served in a war like your grandfather did, World War II or Vietnam or Korea. We have about 3,500 of our over 4,000 collections that are digitized, and people can actually go on and hear or see the interviews that we've done, as well as the photographs, the letters, the diaries that we all have there. So you can do a search on our website to find out what folks like your grandfather did.
Is there a physical place where they're actually housed also?
Yes, they are in the reading room of the American Folklife Center at the Library of Congress. Normally you have to give us a call a day ahead of time so we can get the collection out of the archives, but you can go and actually put your hands on these documents and listen or see the interviews right there at the Library of Congress.
You know, I'm thinking in my mind, this seems like such a huge project, especially with the veterans of the war that is going on today. Who oversees this? I mean, not just, you know, the government body, but logistically, how do you make this happen?
Well, we make it happen. I mean, the Library of Congress is the largest collection of knowledge in the world, and they know how to do it. And when I say archived, it's just like any other library you go into. If you're interested in a subject, in this case veterans, you can go in to look up our collections and actually see these materials.
Who are some of the more famous people that are part of your collection that some of us would know about?
Well, a couple of people, names that you probably recognize, is Senator John McCain, who's very prominent and in the news a lot. Art Buchwald, a leading commentator here in Washington, D.C., who was a Marine during World War II. I don't know if many people know that. Senator Bob Dole has contributed to the collection, as well as several others, members of Congress who have served.
Can family members actually go through the process, or is it just the veteran that can?
It's just the veteran. We want to get the first-hand account, the first-person account from the veteran. Now, family members can participate if a veteran has written a memoir, if they have photographs that the veteran had taken during their time in the military. They can submit those as well on their behalf if the veteran is no longer with us.
Is there an intergenerational component to that?
This, I think, is probably the most important part of the project. And that is generations sitting down with their fathers and their grandfathers and hearing these stories. Too often we hear from family members, you know, he never talks about it, he never tells a story. But when they sit down with a granddaughter or a grandson, for some reason it all starts coming out, and the stories are heard and become a part of the family's history.
Well, I know that World War II veterans are in their 80s now, so it's important for them to get out and leave this legacy.
It really is. There were 16 million World War II veterans at the time of World War II, and now we're down to just over 3 million. So, and they're unfortunately passing away at about 1,000 a day. So it's very, very important to us to get those stories as quickly as we can.
Sure, Bob. Thanks so much for being here. It's very interesting.
It's been my pleasure.